Hi everyone, welcome to the channel After All That Years.
Last Thursday changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my wife, and myself. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened, how 10 years of what I believed was love could crumble in a single evening. I got home from work that night completely drained. Been pulling overtime for weeks on this massive client presentation, and all I wanted was to sink into my recliner with a cold one, and maybe catch some baseball. But the moment I stepped through the front door, something felt different. The house had this strange emptiness to it. Usually my wife Carmen would be bustling around the kitchen, asking about my day, maybe giving me grief for tracking mud on her clean floors. Instead, there was just this hollow quiet that made my skin crawl. I called out her name but got nothing back except the low hum of our old refrigerator. Then, I spotted this sticky note on the granite countertop. Her careful cursive stared back at me. Meeting up with the girls tonight. Don't wait around. No little heart drawn at the bottom like she used to do. No love you or even her initials. Just those few cold words that somehow felt like a slap. I tried to brush off the uneasiness creeping up my spine. Maybe I was reading too much into a simple note. She'd been spending more evenings out lately, sure, but everyone needs their social time, right? Still, my mind kept drifting to last Tuesday when she'd come home smelling like someone else's aftershave, and how she'd been glued to her phone constantly, grinning at messages she'd quickly hide whenever I walked by. Something in my gut was telling me to pay attention, but I didn't want to listen. I loved this woman. We'd built a life together, weathered storms, celebrated victories. Surely that counted for something. I sat at our kitchen table, staring at that damn note, like it might reveal some hidden meaning. After about an hour of my thoughts spinning in circles, I decided to send her a quick text. Nothing pushy, just, hope you're enjoying yourself. Give me a heads up when you're coming home. The message sat there unread. Another hour crawled by, and my anxiety was climbing through the roof. That's when I remembered the location app we'd both installed a few years back. It was supposed to be for safety. If one of us got stranded somewhere or had car trouble, I hesitated, my finger hovering over her contact. Was I crossing some kind of line here? But then I thought about that cologne again, those secretive phone conversations, the way she'd been pulling away from me, physically and emotionally. I needed to know where she was. Her location popped up immediately. Some dive bar called Murphy's on the rough side of town. Not the upscale wine bar downtown where she usually met her girlfriends. Not even close to that neighborhood. My stomach dropped like a stone. Why would she be there? Was she in some kind of trouble? Or was my worst fear about to come true? I grabbed my keys and headed out into the night, my hands trembling as I started the car. The drive felt endless, my mind cycling through every possible scenario, most of them bad. By the time I pulled up to Murphy's, my shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool evening air. The place looked exactly like what it was. A worn-down watering hole with a flickering neon sign and too many motorcycles parked out front. I took a shaky breath and pushed through the heavy wooden door. The bar was packed with the after-work crowd, thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of fried food. I scanned the room, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. And then I saw her. Carmen was tucked into a corner booth, her head thrown back in genuine laughter. Her manicured hand was resting on the forearm of some guy I'd never seen before. He was everything I wasn't. Tall, muscular, with that cocky smile that probably made women weak in the knees, and my wife was eating it up. She was leaning into him like they were the only two people in the room, her body language screaming intimacy in a way that made my blood run cold. For a moment, I couldn't move. I just stood there like an idiot, watching my marriage dissolve before my eyes. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. This was my wife, the woman who'd promised to love and honor me, carrying on with another man like I didn't exist. All those late nights, all those excuses, all those times she'd made me feel crazy for questioning her. It had all been leading to this moment. I wanted to march over there, make a scene, demand explanations. Instead, I found myself walking to the bar on unsteady legs and ordering a double whiskey. I needed liquid courage for whatever was about to happen. I sat there nursing my drink, stealing glances at their table. She still hadn't noticed me, too wrapped up in her little affair to pay attention to her surroundings. They were whispering, touching, acting like teenagers sneaking around. Every second felt like another knife in my chest. The worst part wasn't just the cheating, it was how happy she looked. Happier than I'd seen her in months, maybe years. When was the last time she'd laughed like that with me? When was the last time she'd looked at me with that kind of interest? After what felt like hours, but was probably 20 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, straightened my shoulders, and walked over to their booth. When I cleared my throat, Carmen looked up, and I watched her face change from joy to shock to something that looked suspiciously like annoyance. "Vincent," she said like I was interrupting something important, "what are you doing here?" I stared at her, then at him, then back at her. My throat felt like sandpaper, but I managed to get the words out. "Meeting up with the girls, huh?" Her expression shifted from surprise to defiance. "It's not what you think, Vincent. Don't make this into something it isn't." I let out a laugh that had no humor in it whatsoever. "Really, Carmen? Because it looks exactly like what it is." The guy, her boyfriend, I guess, started mumbling something about not wanting any drama, but I cut him off with a look that could have melted steel. "You need to leave. Now." He glanced at Carmen for permission, but she just sat there with her arms crossed, saying nothing. Eventually, he grabbed his jacket and slunk out of the bar like the coward he was. I turned back to my wife, the woman I'd shared a bed with for a decade, and asked the question I was terrified to hear the answer to. "How long has this been going on?" She rolled her eyes like I was being unreasonable. "Oh, come on, Vincent. Don't be so dramatic. It's not even a big deal." Not a big deal. Those words hit me harder than any screaming match could have. I reached for my wedding ring with shaking hands and slowly pulled it off my finger. "You know what?" I said, holding up the gold band that had meant everything to me. "I thought this represented something real. Guess I was wrong." Before she could respond, I set the ring down on the sticky table between us. "Keep it. Maybe you can give it to him." I walked out of that bar and left my entire world behind. The drive home was a blur of rage, heartbreak, and disbelief. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles had gone white, and my chest felt like someone had reached in and squeezed my heart until it stopped beating. When I pulled into our driveway, the house looked different somehow. Same brick exterior, same flower beds Carmen had insisted on planting, same porch light we'd installed together 3 summers ago. But now it felt like I was looking at a stranger's home. I walked inside and was hit by the silence again. No sounds of life, no warmth, just empty rooms that suddenly felt more like a museum than a home. I sat down at our kitchen table and stared at that note again. Those casual words that had started this nightmare. Meeting up with the girls tonight. My emotions were all over the map. Anger, pain, humiliation, and underneath it all, this terrible sense that I should have seen this coming. The signs had been there, hadn't they? The distance, the secrecy, the way she'd been treating me like an inconvenience rather than a husband. I thought about calling her, demanding a real explanation, but what was the point? I'd already seen everything I needed to see. The image of her laughing with that man, touching him like he was precious to her, was burned into my brain forever. Hours passed while I sat there, trying to process what my life had become. I flipped through TV channels without seeing anything, scrolled through my phone without reading a word. Nothing could distract me from the reality that my marriage was over, had probably been over for longer than I wanted to admit. Around midnight, I heard her car in the driveway. My heart started racing again, a mix of anger and dread washing over me. I didn't know what I was going to say or do, but I knew we couldn't just pretend this hadn't happened. The front door opened and Carmen walked in like she owned the place, which legally, I guess she did. She paused when she saw me sitting in the living room, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before settling into irritation. "You're still awake," she said, like that was somehow my fault. I stood up slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to have a conversation, Carmen." She sighed dramatically and dropped her purse on the coffee table. "Vincent, it's late. Can't whatever this is wait until morning?" "No," I said, my voice louder than I intended. "It can't wait. I need to understand what just happened tonight." She crossed her arms and gave me that look, the one that made me feel like I was overreacting to everything. "What do you mean?" "Nothing happened tonight." I shook my head, amazed at how easily the lies rolled off her tongue. Don't insult my intelligence, Carmen. I saw you at Murphy's with him. Her eyes widened for just a second before narrowing into a glare. So you followed me? That's really pathetic, Vincent. Followed you? I repeated, my voice cracking with disbelief. I wouldn't have needed to if you weren't sneaking around behind my back. She shrugged like we were talking about the weather. It's nothing serious. We're just friends. Friends, I said, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. Is that what you call sitting on top of each other in a dark booth? She threw her hands up in frustration. You're being ridiculous. I can't even talk to another person without you losing your mind. I stared at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw her clearly. There was no remorse in her eyes, no apology on her lips, just defiance and contempt. She didn't care about me at all. You don't even feel bad about this, do you? I said quietly. She rolled her eyes again. Oh, please, Vincent, stop being so melodramatic. This is exactly why I can't talk to you about anything. You're always so insecure. Her words hit me like a physical blow. Insecure. After everything I'd done for her, all the times I'd put her needs before mine, all the years I'd tried to be the husband she wanted, I was the insecure one. I felt tears stinging my eyes, but refused to let them fall. You know what, Carmen? Maybe you're right. Maybe I am insecure. But you've given me every reason to be. She didn't respond, just stood there with her arms crossed, cold as ice. And in that moment, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the person I'd fallen in love with. She wasn't even the person I'd married. She was a stranger who didn't care about me or our marriage. I can't do this anymore, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Can't do what? She asked, her tone mocking. Pretend that this marriage means anything to you. I can't keep fighting for someone who doesn't want to be fought for. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she laughed, a cold, bitter sound that sent chills down my spine. Well, maybe if you weren't such a pathetic excuse for a husband, I'd have something to fight for too. That was it, the final nail in the coffin. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there alone. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't stay there anymore. Not with her, not in that house, not in that life. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him, laughing, touching, looking at him, the way she used to look at me a lifetime ago. My mind was a tornado of emotions, rage, sadness, betrayal, but mostly just this hollow emptiness that made it hard to breathe. I spent the night on the couch, staring at our wedding photo on the mantel. We looked so young, so hopeful. I remembered that day like it was yesterday. How beautiful she'd looked in her dress. How sure I'd been that we'd grow old together. Now it felt like looking at strangers. Did she ever look at that photo? Did it mean anything to her, or was it just another piece of furniture she didn't think about? Morning came, whether I wanted it to or not. Carmen emerged from our bedroom, looking like nothing had happened, already dressed and scrolling through her phone. The casualness of it was infuriating. How could she act so normal when my world was falling apart? She finally glanced up at me. Are you seriously still pouting about last night? Pouting. Like I was a child having a tantrum instead of a man whose wife had just destroyed his marriage. You think that's what this is? I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. Carmen, you betrayed me. You've been lying to my face for God knows how long. She scoffed and tossed her phone onto the counter. Oh, get over it, Vincent. You're acting like I committed murder or something. I went out with a friend, that's it. You're the one making it into some big drama. Her words were gasoline on the fire burning in my chest. I stood up, my hands shaking. Stop lying to me, Carmen. I'm not stupid. I saw how you were with him. She crossed her arms and gave me that condescending look again. You're blowing this completely out of proportion. Honestly, Vincent, this is why I can't stand talking to you anymore. You're always so dramatic about everything. Dramatic. My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. You've been sneaking around behind my back and I'm the dramatic one? She shrugged, her expression cold and dismissive. Maybe if you weren't so clingy and needy all the time, I wouldn't feel like I had to hide things from you. That was the breaking point. Her words cut deeper than everything else she'd said combined. I felt the last shred of hope I'd been holding on to crumble into dust. You know what, Carmen? I said, my voice trembling with anger and hurt. I'm done. I'm done being your emotional punching bag. I'm done fighting for someone who clearly doesn't give a damn about me. She didn't respond, just stared at me with that same cold indifference. I'll pack my things, I continued, turning away from her. You can keep the house, the car, whatever you want. I just want out. For a moment, the room was silent. Then she laughed, that same bitter, mocking sound from the night before. Good, she said. Maybe now I'll finally have some peace and quiet around here. I didn't look back. I walked into our bedroom and started throwing clothes into a suitcase, tears streaming down my face, despite my best efforts to hold them back. I wasn't just leaving a house or ending a marriage. I was walking away from the life I thought we were building together. When I dragged my suitcase to the front door, she didn't try to stop me. She didn't say goodbye. She just sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone like I was already forgotten. The drive away from our house felt surreal, like watching my life collapse in slow motion. My car was packed with hastily grabbed belongings, and I had no idea where I was going. I just needed to get away from her, from the memories, from the wreckage of everything I'd believed in. I ended up at a budget motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place with buzzing fluorescent lights and carpet that had seen better decades. It wasn't much, but it was all I could manage on such short notice. I checked in, dropped my bag on the scratchy bedspread, and collapsed onto the mattress. Staring at the water-stained ceiling, the full weight of what had just happened finally hit me. I'd left my home, my marriage, my entire life, and for what? A woman who didn't care enough about me to even pretend she was sorry. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through old pictures of us. There we were on our honeymoon in Mexico, both of us grinning at the camera. Another shot from my company picnic last summer, Carmen's arm around my waist. And there was the photo of us in front of our first apartment, both of us so excited about starting our life together. What had gone wrong? When did her laughter turn into silence? When did love turn into contempt? I replayed every argument, every cold shoulder, every moment when she'd treated me like I was bothering her just by existing. Maybe I should have seen it coming. Maybe I'd been so desperate to hold on to what we used to have that I'd ignored all the signs that it was already gone. Our marriage had been dying for years, and I'd been the only one trying to keep it alive. I spent the next few days in that motel room, wallowing in my own misery. I called in sick to work, ignored messages from friends, barely managed to choke down a sandwich here and there. I was a mess, a broken, heartbroken mess, who couldn't see past his own pain. But on the fourth day, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the endless hours of self-pity. Or maybe it was the realization that Carmen wasn't losing any sleep over me. But I knew I couldn't stay like this forever. I had to pick myself up, no matter how shattered I felt. I started by reaching out to my buddy Carl from work. He'd always been straight with me, never sugarcoated anything. I told him everything. Finding Carmen at the bar, the cold way she'd dismissed my pain, walking out on 10 years of marriage. Man, I'm sorry this happened to you, he said after I finished. But honestly, you did the right thing. You deserve better than someone who treats you like garbage. Hearing those words from someone else felt like a lifeline. For the first time in days, I didn't feel completely alone. Carl offered to let me crash in his spare room until I could get back on my feet. It wasn't ideal. Going from homeowner to houseguest at 45 wasn't exactly how I'd pictured my life going. But it beat rotting away in that depressing motel. Living with Carl was humbling, but it gave me space to think. I started going to the gym regularly, channeling my anger and frustration into something productive. I threw myself into work, staying late partly to avoid going home to face the emptiness of my new reality. Carmen, meanwhile, didn't reach out once. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was like our 10-year marriage had never existed. That hurt more than I wanted to admit, but it also fueled my determination to move forward. If she could erase me from her life so easily, then I could do the same. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. 2 weeks had passed since I'd walked out of my house and my marriage. Life had settled into a strange routine. Wake up in Carl's spare room, go to work, hit the gym, come home exhausted, repeat. I told myself I was healing, but really I was just going through the motions, trying to fill the hours until I could fall asleep and forget for a while. Then one evening my phone buzzed with Carmen's name on the screen. Seeing it there made my heart skip, and I hated myself for that reaction. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. Hello, I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. Vincent, she said, and her tone was different, sharper, more businesslike. We need to talk. I let out a humorless laugh. Oh, now you want to talk? Sure, I'm not being too dramatic by wanting to have a conversation. She ignored my sarcasm. I need you to come by the house. We have things to sort out. What thing? I asked, though I had a pretty good idea where this was heading. Don't play dumb, she snapped. We need to figure out how this is going to work. The house, the bills, all of it. I didn't want to go back there. The thought of stepping into that house again, surrounded by memories of what we used to be, felt like volunteering for torture. But I knew this conversation was inevitable. Fine, I said, tomorrow evening. And the next day dragged by. I couldn't concentrate at work, couldn't focus on anything except the upcoming meeting with Carmen. By the time evening rolled around, my stomach was in knots. I pulled into our driveway, or what used to be our driveway, and sat there for a moment, steeling myself. The house looked the same as always, but it felt different now. Like I was visiting a place from my past, rather than coming home. Carmen opened the door before I could knock, which told me she'd been watching for me. Her expression was unreadable as she stepped aside to let me in. The familiar smell of her vanilla candles hit me immediately, but instead of comfort, it brought back memories that now felt tainted. Everything looked the same. Same furniture, same decorations, same framed photos of us that she apparently hadn't bothered to put away yet. Sit, she said, gesturing toward the dining room table. I did, though the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. She sat across from me, her posture rigid and businesslike. So, she began, folding her hands on the table, let's talk about how we're going to handle this. Handle what exactly? I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. She sighed like I was being difficult. The divorce, Vincent. The house, the cars, dividing up our stuff. We need to figure out the logistics. Divorce. Hearing the word spoken out loud hit me harder than I expected. Even after everything that had happened, part of me hadn't quite accepted that it was really over. I want to keep the house, she continued, like we were negotiating a business deal. Obviously, and my car. We'll need to figure out who takes what furniture, how to handle the joint accounts, all that stuff. Of course she wanted to keep the house. She wanted to keep everything that mattered while discarding the one thing that didn't. Me. Fine, I said, my voice flat. Keep the house. Keep whatever you want. I don't care anymore. She looked surprised, like she'd been expecting more of a fight. Really? You're not going to argue about it? I shook my head. What's the point? You've made it pretty clear what's important to you, and it's not me. So, take it all. I just want this to be over. For a moment, she didn't respond. Then she nodded, like we'd just concluded a successful business transaction. Good. I'm glad we can be mature about this. Mature. The word echoed in my head as I sat there looking at the woman I'd once thought I'd spend my life with. There was nothing mature about what she'd done to our marriage, nothing mature about the way she'd dismissed my pain and blamed me for her betrayal. Is that it? I asked, standing up from the table. I guess so, she said, not bothering to walk me to the door. As I headed for the exit, I couldn't help but take one last look around. This had been my home for 5 years, the place where I'd thought we were building something lasting. Now it was just another house that I used to live in. The drive back to Carl's place felt endless. I couldn't stop replaying Carmen's words, the casual way she'd discussed dismantling our life together. She'd shown more emotion picking out what to have for lunch than she had talking about ending our marriage. Carl was watching TV when I got back, but he muted it the moment he saw my face. Rough night? He asked. I told him about the meeting, about Carmen's business-like approach to our divorce, about how she'd acted like I was just another item on her to-do list. Carl shook his head, his expression disgusted. She's something else, man. You're better off without her. I wanted to believe that, but it was hard to feel better off when everything I'd worked for was gone. Over the next few days, I tried to focus on moving forward. I started looking at apartments, small places I could afford on my own. I began the process of separating our joint accounts and credit cards. It was all bureaucratic stuff, but each step felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. Then I got a phone call that changed everything. I was at work, trying to lose myself in a project, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Hello, Vincent. This is Joyce from Carmen's office. Joyce. I remembered her from a few company parties, a nice woman in her 50s who worked in accounting. We'd chatted a few times, but I couldn't imagine why she'd be calling me. Hi, Joyce, I said, confused. What can I do for you? There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was hesitant. Look, I probably shouldn't be calling you, but I couldn't stay quiet about this anymore. It's about Carmen. My stomach dropped. What about her? Another pause. She's been having an affair with her supervisor, Rick Morrison, and Vincent. It's been going on for months. Even though I'd suspected as much, hearing it confirmed felt like a punch to the gut. How do you know? She's not exactly subtle about it, Joyce said, her voice tight with disapproval. She talks about him constantly at work, brags about their dates. It's honestly disgusting. And the worst part is, she's been telling people at the office that she's glad you moved out because it makes things easier for her. The room seemed to tilt around me. Easier for her. That's all our marriage had been to her. An inconvenience she was happy to get rid of. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Because you deserve to know the truth, Joyce said. And because you deserve better than what she's putting you through. She's been making a fool out of you, Vincent, and she doesn't even feel bad about it. After we hung up, I sat there in my office, trying to process what I'd just learned. Carmen had been cheating with her boss for months. She'd been talking about it at work, treating our marriage like a joke. And now she was celebrating my absence, because it made her affair more convenient. The anger that I'd been trying to suppress came roaring back, stronger than ever. I'd spent weeks blaming myself, wondering what I could have done differently, feeling like maybe I really was the pathetic, insecure husband she'd accused me of being. But this wasn't about me being inadequate. This was about her being a liar and a cheat who'd betrayed everything we'd built together. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than sadness and self-doubt. I felt determined to fight back. The next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called a divorce lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the best one I could afford. If Carmen wanted to play hardball, then I was going to give her a game she'd never forget. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Helen Rodriguez, listened to my story with professional detachment. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and gave me a look that was part sympathy, part steel. Vincent, she said, infidelity cases can get ugly. But if we can prove what you're telling me, we can make sure you're not the one who gets hurt financially. What do you mean, prove it? I asked. I mean documentation, photos, witnesses, evidence of the affair. Right now, it's your word against hers. She gave me the card of a private investigator she worked with regularly. His name is Tony Morales. He's expensive, but he's worth it. If your wife is as careless as you say she is, he'll get what we need. I stared at the card, hesitating. Hiring a PI felt like crossing a line I'd never imagined crossing. But then I thought about Joyce's words, about Carmen bragging to her coworkers about her affair, about how glad she was that I was gone. I made the call that afternoon. Tony Morales was exactly what you'd expect from a private investigator. Gruff, no nonsense, with eyes that looked like they'd seen everything twice. We met at a coffee shop downtown, and I laid out the whole story for him. Don't worry, he said, sliding a contract across the table. If she's as sloppy as you say, this'll be easy. Give me a week. While Tony did his work, I focused on rebuilding my life. I found a decent one-bedroom apartment across town and signed the lease. It wasn't much. Basic appliances, thin walls, a view of the parking lot. But it was mine. For the first time since leaving Carmen, I had a space that belonged entirely to me. I also started reconnecting with friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. It was embarrassing, having to explain why I was suddenly back in their lives, but most of them were understanding. One of them, my old college buddy Marcus, said something that stuck with me. Dude, Carmen always seemed kind of cold to me, he admitted over beers one night. Like she thought she was too good for you or something. I never understood what you saw in her. His words stung, but they also made me realize something important. I'd spent so many years trying to make Carmen happy, trying to be the husband I thought she wanted, that I'd lost sight of my own worth. I'd let her treat me like I was lucky to have her, when the truth was, she should have felt lucky to have me. A week later, Tony called. Got what you need, he said simply. Can you meet me this afternoon? We met at the same coffee shop, and he handed me a thick envelope. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside were dozens of photos. Carmen and Rick having lunch at upscale restaurants, walking hand in hand through downtown, kissing in the parking lot of a hotel. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. This should be more than enough for your lawyer, Tony said. Your wife wasn't exactly trying to hide it. That night, I called Helen and told her about the photos. She scheduled a meeting for the following week to go over our strategy. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I had some control over my situation. But I wasn't prepared for how those photos would affect me. Looking at them felt like reliving the moment I'd first seen Carmen with Rick at the bar, except now I could see the full scope of their relationship. They looked happy together, genuinely, naturally happy, in a way that Carmen and I hadn't been in years. It hurt, but it also clarified something for me. This wasn't just about Carmen having an affair. Our marriage had been dead for a long time, and I'd been the only one trying to keep it alive. The photos were just evidence of what I should have accepted months ago. The day of our meeting with the lawyers arrived faster than I'd expected. I spent the morning reviewing the photos with Helen, making sure I understood our strategy. The evidence was so strong that she was confident we could get a very favorable settlement. "Remember," she told me as we walked into the conference room, "stay calm. Let the evidence do the talking." Carmen was already there with her lawyer, a nervous-looking guy in a cheap suit who kept shuffling through his papers. She was dressed like she was going to a party instead of a legal proceeding, a bright yellow dress that probably cost more than my rent. Her confident expression faltered when she saw me walk in with Helen and a thick folder of documents. She tried to cover it with her usual dismissive attitude, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "Let's get this over with," she said, barely looking at me. Helen started by laying out the basic terms we were seeking, but Carmen interrupted before she could finish. "That's ridiculous," Carmen snapped. "I'm not agreeing to any of that. Vincent doesn't deserve half of anything." Helen smiled, the kind of smile that probably made opposing lawyers nervous. "Actually, Mrs. Santos, given the circumstances of your marriage's dissolution, I think you'll find that Vincent deserves quite a bit more than half." She opened the folder and spread the photographs across the table. Carmen's face went white as she saw herself and Rick captured in dozens of compromising moments. "What the hell is this?" Carmen demanded, her voice rising. "You hired someone to spy on me?" "I hired someone to document your adultery," I said calmly, which, as it turns out, wasn't very hard to do. Her lawyer leaned over to whisper something in her ear, but she shook him off. "This is disgusting, Vincent," she hissed. "You're pathetic. This is exactly why I couldn't stand being married to you anymore. You're weak and paranoid and—" "Mrs. Santos," Helen interrupted smoothly, "I'd advise you to save your comments for your therapist. Right now, we need to discuss how these photographs are going to affect the division of your marital assets." What followed was the most satisfying hour of my life. With the evidence of Carmen's infidelity laid out in front of us, her lawyer couldn't argue for much of anything. The prenup we'd signed years ago had an infidelity clause that heavily favored the wronged party, something Carmen had insisted on back then, ironically enough. By the end of the meeting, I'd secured the house, both cars, and the majority of our joint savings. Carmen would get her personal belongings, and that was about it. Her face was a mask of barely controlled rage as the terms were read out. "This is bullshit," she spat as we prepared to leave. "You think you've won something, Vincent? You're still the same pathetic loser you always were. This doesn't change that." I paused at the conference room door and looked back at her. For the first time in months, I smiled. A real, genuine smile. "Maybe I am the same guy," I said. "But at least now, I don't have you dragging me down anymore." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of paperwork, court dates, and moving arrangements. Carmen fought the settlement tooth and nail, but the evidence was too strong. Her affair with Rick had been documented so thoroughly that her lawyer eventually advised her to accept the terms rather than risk an even worse outcome in court. Moving back into the house felt strange at first. Everything reminded me of our life together. The kitchen where we'd cooked dinner, the living room where we'd watched movies, the bedroom where we'd once been happy. But gradually, I started making it mine again. I rearranged furniture, bought new artwork, even painted a few rooms. It was therapeutic, like erasing the traces of a life that had never been as real as I'd thought. I threw myself into work with renewed energy. Without the constant stress of trying to save a dying marriage, I found I could focus better than I had in years. My boss noticed the change and started giving me more responsibility, which came with a nice bump in salary. I also started dating again, though I took it slow. The betrayal had left scars that I knew would take time to heal, but for the first time in years, I felt optimistic about the future. I had my self-respect back, my financial security, and most importantly, I was free from someone who had never really valued me. As for Carmen, I heard through the grapevine that her relationship with Rick didn't last long after our divorce was finalized. Apparently, he wasn't as interested in her once she didn't have a house and a husband to fall back on. She ended up renting a small apartment across town and taking a job at a different company after the office gossip about their affair made her position untenable. I can't say I felt sorry for her. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. Looking back now, 6 months later, I can see that losing Carmen wasn't the tragedy I thought it was at the time. It was the beginning of a new chapter, a chance to rediscover who I was without someone constantly telling me I wasn't enough. For the first time in years, I was genuinely excited about what the future might hold. The man who'd sat in that dive bar watching his wife betray him felt like a different person now. He'd been broken, defeated, willing to accept whatever scraps of affection Carmen was willing to throw his way. But that man was gone, replaced by someone who knew his own worth and wouldn't settle for less than he deserved. It had taken the worst night of my life to teach me the most important lesson I'd ever learned. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself again. And for that, as painful as it was, I was almost grateful. Carmen had done me a favor, though she'd never see it that way. She'd forced me to stop settling for a marriage that was slowly killing me from the inside. She'd made me realize that being alone was better than being with someone who didn't value me. And in the end, that realization had set me free.